The night sky above the burned battlefield was heavy with smoke and broken light. Stars that once shined with peace were now hidden behind fire and ash. The sound of metal breaking, sparks flying, and the cries of dying warriors filled the silence of the galaxy. In the middle of this chaos, a young alien princess found herself alone. Her name was Princess Solari of the Vayrene Empire, daughter of a proud and powerful family. She had grown up inside golden halls, surrounded by music, wisdom, and honor. Every step she took was watched by guards. Every word she spoke was listened to with respect. She had never been touched by hunger, pain, or fear. Her life had been protected like a delicate flame in the wind. But tonight everything was different. Her royal ship, the Eternal Crown, had been attacked by enemies who wanted her blood and her empire's secrets. It fell from the sky like a broken star, smashing into the surface of the ruined planet below. When she opened her eyes inside the wreck, the air was filled with smoke and fire. Her guards lay motionless, their armor cracked. Her people were gone. She was alone. Solari tried to stand, but her legs shook. A sharp piece of metal had cut her side, and every step was pain. Still she walked. The halls of her ship were no longer grand. They were broken tombs of fire and silence. Each breath felt heavy. Each moment carried the shadow of death. For the first time in her life, the princess was afraid. She pressed her hand against the wall, her silver skin glowing faintly in the dark. Her heart raced as she heard distant footsteps. Enemy soldiers were searching for survivors. They wanted her alive, not to save her, but to use her as a trophy of war. Solari's pride had always been strong. She was taught never to bow, never to beg. But pride is a weak shield against fear. That night she whispered to herself, "I don't want to die here." Her voice shook softer than the crackling flames. Then, through the thick smoke, she saw something strange. A figure moving carefully, holding a dim light. Not one of her kind. Not a soldier. Not a hunter. The figure walked with a limp, but moved, with quiet strength. It was a human. His clothes were torn. His skin was dirty with ash, and a trail of blood ran down his arm. He carried no weapon, no armor, only a small lamp in one hand, and in his eyes, a stubborn fire that did not match his fragile body. Solari froze. She had heard of humans before, fragile creatures from a small blue world, often underestimated by the great powers of the galaxy. They were said to be reckless, emotional, and stubborn. Some called them weak, some called them dangerous. She never expected to meet one here, in the ruins of her fallen ship. The human noticed her. His eyes widened as he saw the alien princess, standing in the smoke, her royal robes torn, her crown gone. For a long moment, the two just stared at each other. Solari wanted to speak, but her throat felt dry. She had never asked anyone outside her empire for help. She had never lowered herself before strangers. But here, in the dark, she had no soldiers, no power, no pride left, only fear. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please, help me." The words felt strange. They carried shame, but also hope. The human stepped closer, studying her with cautious eyes. He didn't bow or salute. He didn't treat her like a goddess or a prisoner. He looked at her as if she were simply another soul in danger. Another life worth saving. In that moment, Solari felt something unexpected. She felt seen, not as a princess, not as a ruler, but as someone who was scared and broken. The human nodded slowly. His voice was steady, gentle, yet filled with strength. "All right," he said, "let's get you out of here." Those simple words struck her heart deeper than any oath of loyalty she had ever received. And so, in the middle of war and fire, a princess of the stars placed her life in the hands of a single human. She did not know his name. She did not know his story. But she knew this. Sometimes hope comes not in the form of armies or thrones, but in one stranger who refuses to walk away. The man's name was Daniel, though the princess did not know it yet. He was not a soldier, not a leader, not even someone important in the galaxy. He was only an engineer, a man who fixed machines, built small tools, and worked quietly on ships that never carried his name. To most, he was ordinary. To some, invisible. But in that burning wreck, he was the only one who stepped forward. Daniel had been caught in the middle of the battle by accident. His transport ship had been torn apart when the alien fleets clashed. He should have hidden, should have run. But instead, he wandered into the ruins with nothing but a lamp and his own stubborn will to survive. He had already been hurt. His arm carried a deep cut, his ribs ached with every breath, but still he moved, one step at a time. When his light fell on the princess, he did not see a ruler or an alien empire or a prize of war. He saw someone, trembling, someone bleeding, someone who needed help. That was enough. Solari, however, struggled to understand. Her whole life, people had wanted something from her. Her guards protected her for honor. Her council obeyed her for power. Even her allies stood at her side only because of her crown. But this human, his eyes were different. They carried no greed, no hidden purpose, only concern. "Lean on me," Daniel said quietly, stepping close. His voice was rough, filled with dust but strangely calming. Solari hesitated. She had never touched a human before. In her lessons, she had heard they were fragile, clumsy, and too emotional to be trusted. In serious matters, yet this one held himself steady like a mountain, ready to carry weight far greater than his size. Slowly, she placed her hand on his shoulder. The fabric of his shirt was torn and stained with blood, but his body was firm. Stronger than she expected, as they walked through the broken corridor, the ship groaned like a wounded beast. Sparks jumped from the walls and the floor was cracked with fire. Every sound of approaching soldiers made her heart pound faster, but Daniel moved with quiet confidence, guiding her step by step, always looking ahead as if he knew a way out. At one point, Solari's strength failed her. She stumbled, pain shooting through her side. Daniel caught her before she fell, holding her upright. "You're hurt badly," he said, his brow furrowing. Solari forced a weak smile. "So are you." For a moment, their eyes met. The princess had never spoken to anyone like this before. She was used to giving orders, not sharing weakness. Yet here she was, bleeding beside a human stranger, and it felt strangely honest. They continued through the smoke, climbing over fallen beams and crawling under collapsed doors. Solari's robes caught on jagged metal, tearing further, but Daniel never let go of her hand. Each time she faltered, he pulled her forward as if his only purpose in the universe was to make sure she survived. Finally, when they paused in a small shadowed corner, Solari whispered, "Why are you helping me? You know who I am. You must know what your people think of us." Daniel looked at her with a small, tired smile. "I don't care about that. You asked for help." Those words struck her harder than any weapon. She had spent her life surrounded by people who obeyed her because they had to, but this man helped because he chose to. There was no fear in his tone, no calculation in his eyes. It was simple. It was human. Solari's heart felt heavy, but not with fear this time. With something new, something she did not yet understand. For Daniel, the journey was not about crowns or empires. He did not think of politics or reward. He only thought of the person beside him who needed him to be strong. And in that small corner of a broken ship, Daniel proved something that the princess would never forget. Sometimes the greatest strength is not in power, but in kindness. And so, a fragile human engineer became the protector of an alien princess. Neither of them knew what waited in the shadows ahead. Neither knew if they would live to see another sunrise. But they walked together step by step, holding on to a hope that was born not from thrones or armies, but from one simple choice: the choice to care. The wrecked ship was no longer a place of safety. Every wall groaned under the weight of fire. Every hallway carried the echo of enemy footsteps. The once proud vessel of the Vayrine Empire had become nothing more than a graveyard of broken steel and shattered dreams. Daniel moved carefully, his lamp flickering against the smoke. Beside him, Princess Solari leaned on his arm, each step heavy with pain. Her wounds slowed her, and yet she forced herself forward. She was a princess, and her pride told her not to appear weak, but the truth was clear. Without him, she would not last. The corridors stretched before them like the veins of a dying creature. Fallen beams blocked their way. Sparks fell like rain from broken wires, and the air was thick with dust that burned the lungs. Solari had grown up in palaces filled with fresh air, gardens, and gentle music. This place was the opposite, ugly, cruel, and filled with death. At one point, a loud crash echoed behind them. Solari froze, her heart racing. The sound of heavy boots followed. The enemy hunters were moving closer, searching for survivors. Daniel pulled her quickly into a narrow passage, placing his body between her and the open hall. His eyes narrowed, listening carefully until the sound of the boots faded. "Stay close," he whispered. She nodded, though her chest tightened with something she had never felt before. Trust. Not trust in her guards, not trust in her empire, but in this one fragile human who walked beside her with steady courage. They crawled under collapsed ceilings, their hands scraping against sharp edges. Daniel shielded her whenever a beam cracked or a loose plate fell. His arms, though bruised and bleeding, never hesitated. Each time the princess stumbled, he was there, lifting her gently but firmly, as if her life mattered more than his own. Solari, who had never touched dirt or blood in her life, now felt her royal robe torn and stained. She should have felt shame, but instead she felt strangely alive. The pain reminded her she was still breathing, and the human's presence reminded her she was not alone. After what felt like hours, they reached a wide corridor filled with firelight. The walls were split open, showing pieces of the night sky. Through the broken panels, Solari saw stars shining faintly beyond the smoke. For the first time since the attack, hope touched her heart. Daniel noticed her looking. "We're close," he said softly. "There must be an exit nearby." But their hope was tested again when a sharp metallic noise rang out. Ahead of them, enemy voices echoed through the passage. The hunters were searching methodically, scanning every shadow with their cruel weapons. Solari's breath caught in her throat. Her people had told stories of these hunters, their strength, their lack of mercy. If they found her now, she would be dragged in chains. She turned to Daniel, her silver eyes trembling. "If they find us, leave me. You can still escape alone." Daniel shook his head firmly, his jaw tight. "Not happening. We both walk out." His words were simple, but they struck deep. In her world, sacrifice was always demanded for power. Soldiers gave their lives for rulers, servants bent their backs for nobles, and allies fought only for promises of reward. But this man spoke of no reward, no empire, only a refusal to abandon her. Together they moved silently, hiding behind fallen pillars, waiting for the hunters to pass. Solari pressed her body close to the wall, her heart beating so loudly she feared they would hear it. Daniel placed his hand gently on her shoulder, steadying her. His touch was warm, grounding her in the storm. At last they slipped into another broken corridor that led downward. The air grew colder, darker. Their path was narrow, the ground uneven, but Daniel kept guiding her step by step. Every time she faltered, his hand was there. Every time she doubted, his voice whispered steady hope. For Solari, this was a new kind of strength. She had seen soldiers fight bravely, but their strength came from orders and duty. Daniel's strength came from choice, from something within his heart that no empire could command. As they reached a collapsed airlock, Solari finally realized the truth. This fragile human, who carried no armor and no crown, was carrying her. And for the first time in her life, the alien princess felt that survival was possible not because of her empire, not because of her name, but because of him. The escape had just begun, but already, Solari knew her life would never be the same. The ruined corridor led them to what looked like an escape point. A shattered airlock stood ahead, its outer doors bent but still passable. Beyond it, Daniel could see the dark rocks of the planet's surface and the faint glow of stars above. Freedom was close, so close that for a moment, hope filled his tired chest. But hope shattered in the next heartbeat. Standing between them and the broken airlock were 3 enemy hunters. They were tall, their armor black as shadow and gleaming with alien symbols. Their faces were hidden behind masks that glowed with red light, and their weapons pulsed with cruel energy. Each step they took was heavy, like the sound of death itself walking forward. Daniel instinctively pulled Solari behind him. His arm spread out, as if his body alone could shield her from those giants. He had no gun, no blade, only a small wrench he had carried for repairs. Against armored hunters it was nothing, but in his hand it felt like more than metal. It was will. The hunters stopped when they saw the pair. Their glowing eyes scanned Daniel with amusement, then shifted to the princess. One tilted its head and gave a low, cruel laugh. "The lost jewel of the Varian Empire," one of them said in a harsh voice. "And guarded by a human? How pathetic." Solari's heart sank. She had been trained since childhood to never show fear, to never bow her head. But now, staring at these monsters, she felt her courage break. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "We are finished." Daniel turned his head slightly toward her, his face calm despite the fear in his veins. "Not yet," he said. Those 2 words were simple, but they carried a weight that Solari had never heard before. He was not her guard, not her soldier, yet he spoke as if her life was already his responsibility. The hunters began to move closer, their weapons raised. Daniel gripped the wrench tighter. His ribs ached, his arm burned from the deep cut, and his whole body screamed with exhaustion. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the princess standing behind him, fragile but proud, who had placed her life in his hands. For a second, Daniel thought of home, of the blue skies of Earth, of the quiet life he once lived as an engineer. He had never wanted war, never asked for heroism. Yet here he was, standing between an alien princess and death itself. If this was the moment he was meant to fall, then he would fall standing. The hunters laughed again, raising their weapons to strike. To them, he was a joke, a fragile human, trying to play protector. They had faced armies before, burned planets, crushed soldiers under their boots. One man with a wrench was nothing. But Daniel did not step back, his feet planted firmly on the broken ground, his shoulders squared, his breath steadied. He looked at them not with fear but with defiance. Behind him, Solari's eyes widened. She had seen thousands of warriors stand ready for battle. She had heard oaths shouted before armies, seen soldiers swear to die for their empire. Yet none of those moments compared to this, a single human, battered and small, holding his ground, with a fire that came from the soul. In that moment, Solari understood something she had never been taught. Real courage was not the absence of fear. It was standing tall even when fear consumed you. Daniel raised the wrench, his voice steady. "You'll have to go through me first." The hunters stopped laughing. The red glow of their eyes sharpened. What was once amusement turned to something colder, respect mixed with annoyance. They had underestimated him. The corridor grew silent, filled only with the sound of burning metal and distant explosions. Solari's hands trembled as she clutched her side. Her eyes locked on Daniel's back. For the first time since her ship had fallen, she felt something stronger than despair. She felt the spark of belief. The human was ready to fight, and though she feared what would happen, she also knew this truth. Win or lose, live or die, Daniel would not let her face the hunters alone. The corridor was silent for a moment, broken only by the hiss of fire and the distant rumble of explosions. The 3 hunters stood like shadows of death, their glowing weapons aimed, their armored feet heavy on the broken floor. Daniel gripped the wrench in his hand. It was small, useless against their armor, but it was all he had. His body ached, his breath came shallow, and yet his eyes did not look away. He knew the truth. He could not win. But he also knew something deeper. He could not give up. Behind him, Princess Solari pressed her back to the wall, her heart racing. She wanted to scream at him to run, to leave her, to survive on his own. But when she looked at him, standing tall against impossible odds, her words died on her lips. She had never seen courage like this. The first hunter moved, stepping forward with a cruel laugh. "A human with a toy," it said, raising its weapon. "This will be quick." Daniel's hand tightened on the wrench. His voice was quiet but firm. "Not while I'm breathing." With a roar, the hunter lunged. Daniel dodged sideways, barely, escaping the strike, and swung the wrench with all his strength. The metal cracked against the hunter's helmet with a sharp clang. It did not break the armor, but it stunned the enemy for a heartbeat. Daniel pressed forward, using speed instead of strength. He ducked under the second swing, his ribs screaming with pain, and struck again at the joints of the armor. Sparks flew, but the hunter only growled, shoving him back with brutal force. Daniel crashed against the wall, his vision spinning, yet he forced himself to stand. Solari gasped, her hands trembling. Every strike against him felt like a strike against her own chest. She had been raised to believe humans were weak, but here was one, covered in blood, refusing to fall. The second hunter joined the attack, moving fast. Daniel blocked with the wrench, the impact shaking his bones. He countered, striking low at the knees, but the hunter's armor was thick. The blow barely left a mark. The alien lifted its weapon high, ready to crush him. Solari cried out, "Daniel!" Her voice reached him like fire in the dark. With sudden strength, Daniel rolled to the side, the weapon slamming into the floor instead of his chest. He scrambled up, striking again at the crack in the first hunter's helmet. This time, the blow landed hard enough to send the creature stumbling back, but the victory was small. The third hunter moved now, circling him, its red eyes glowing with fury. Daniel stood, chest heaving, sweat and blood mixing on his face. He knew he could not last. 3 against 1 was impossible. Yet still he lifted the wrench. "Come on, then," he muttered, defiance burning in his tone. The hunters attacked together. Daniel fought like a man possessed. He dodged, struck and blocked, each movement born not from training but from raw will. His arms shook, his body screamed, but his spirit refused to bend. Every second he bought was another second the princess was safe. That thought alone kept him moving. Solari's eyes filled with tears. She had seen soldiers die for her empire, but none had fought like this, not with pride, not with duty, but with pure human stubbornness. His every strike shouted one truth: "You are not alone." At last, one hunter caught him across the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. His wrench slipped from his hand, skidding across the floor. Daniel gasped, blood on his lips, but even as he lay there, he tried to push himself up again. The tallest hunter raised its blade high, ready to finish him. Solari's body shook. In that moment, something inside her broke. She could not watch this human, this fragile man who had stood for her, die while she did nothing. Her fear turned into fire. With a scream that shook the air, Solari raised her hands. A blinding light burst from her palms, a power she had been taught never to use. Energy exploded down the corridor, striking the hunters and throwing them against the walls. Their weapons clattered to the ground as the light burned through their armor. When the glow faded, silence filled the ship once more. Daniel lay on the ground, bloodied but alive. Solari dropped to her knees beside him, catching his head in her trembling hands. Tears streaked down her face as she whispered, "Why, Daniel? Why fight for me?" His lips curled into a weak, pained smile. "Because you needed me." Solari's tears fell onto his skin. For the first time in her royal life, she felt powerless. And, yet in his arms, she also felt something she had never known before. Hope. The corridor still smoked from the burst of Solari's power. Pieces of broken armor lay scattered, and the hunters who had seemed unstoppable now lay silent against the walls. For the first time since her ship had fallen, there was no enemy moving toward her. But peace did not come to her heart. Solari knelt beside Daniel, who lay on the ground, his chest rising and falling with sharp, shallow breaths. His skin was pale and blood stained his torn clothes. His eyes were half closed, yet even in his weakness, a faint smile lingered on his lips. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, Daniel, do not leave me." Her hands shook as she pressed them against his wounds. She had been raised in a palace where others healed her with care and skill. She had never once had to save another. Now, every drop of his blood felt like it was tearing her heart apart. Daniel's eyes flickered open for a moment. "Still breathing," he murmured, his voice weak but steady. "Told you, we'd make it." Tears burned her eyes. "You fought 3 hunters with nothing but your hands. You are broken, yet you still smile." He coughed, pain in his throat, yet his gaze stayed locked on her. "Because you're alive. That's enough." Solari's breath caught. Her entire life, her worth had been tied to her crown, her title, her empire. But Daniel saw her as more than that. To him, her survival mattered not because she was a princess, but because she was simply herself. She looked down at her hands, glowing faintly with the same energy that had saved them moments ago. The power inside her was ancient, something her family had hidden for generations. She had always been told to never use it, because it was too dangerous, because it marked her as different, because it might make others fear her. But now she realized something. What was the point of power if not to protect? Solari closed her eyes, letting her hands rest on Daniel's chest. She reached deep inside herself, into that forbidden well of energy. It burned, fierce and wild, threatening to consume her. Yet when she thought of his face, his voice, his courage, the fire softened. It became light. The glow spread from her hands into his body. Daniel's breathing steadied, the bleeding slowed, and color slowly returned to his cheeks. He opened, his eyes fully, confusion mixed with relief. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "Saving you," she said, her voice shaking. "Because you saved me." For the first time in her life, she did not care about rules or traditions or what her empire would say. She cared only about this human who had stood between her and death without hesitation. Daniel's eyes softened. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," she replied firmly, her tears falling onto him. "I cannot watch you give everything, while I give nothing. Not anymore." As the light faded, Daniel sat up slowly. His pain eased, though his body was still weak. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a princess, not as a figure of power, but as a person. And she looked back, seeing him not as a stranger, but as the reason her heart still beat with hope. Silence filled the broken corridor, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of a choice made. Solari reached for his hand, her silver fingers trembling as they wrapped around his rough human skin. "From this moment, I will not be only a princess who hides behind others. I will be someone who stands with you." Daniel squeezed her hand weakly but firmly. His tired smile returned. "Then we'll get out of this. Together." She nodded, her eyes shining. Together. The word felt heavier than any crown, but also far more precious. The hunters had been defeated, but Solari knew more enemies would come. They were not yet safe. The journey ahead would be dangerous. But for the first time, she did not feel afraid. She had seen her own strength. She had seen his, and she knew that as long as they stood side by side, hope would not die. In that dark corridor of a ruined ship, an alien princess made her choice, not to be carried by her crown, not to be defined by her empire, but to walk the path of survival, with a single human by her side. And in her heart, she knew this truth. That choice would change not just her life, but perhaps the future of her entire galaxy. The wreck of the royal ship burned behind them like a fading star. The sky above, the Ruined world was painted with fire, smoke, and the silent glow of distant planets. Daniel and Princess Solari moved slowly across the rocky ground, their steps unsteady but filled with determination. Every breath they took was heavy with exhaustion, yet neither of them let go of the other's hand. For hours they walked, searching for safety. Solari guided them toward the location of a hidden beacon, a device that could call her people to rescue them. But each step reminded her of the man beside her. His clothes were torn, his skin bruised, his strength nearly gone, yet he still carried himself with stubborn fire, as if his only mission was to keep her alive. At last, they reached a high ridge where the stars spread across the night sky like diamonds. Solari activated the beacon. A bright signal rose into the heavens, calling out across the void. Soon rescue ships from her empire would come. She would be safe. Her people would rejoice at her survival. But as the beacon pulsed in the air, a thought filled her heart with weight. Daniel was human. He was not her soldier, not her subject. When her people arrived, what would they see him as? A stranger? An intruder? Perhaps even an enemy? She turned to him, her silver eyes soft and uncertain. "Daniel," she whispered, "when they come, they may not welcome you. They may see you as nothing, or worse." Daniel gave a tired chuckle, leaning against a rock. "Wouldn't be the first time I've been called nothing." His eyes, though heavy, carried warmth. "But I'm still here. And so are you. That's enough for me." Her chest tightened. In all her life, surrounded by honor and wealth, she had never heard words more precious. The night air was cold, and Solari found herself sitting close to him, her robe torn and stained with blood. For once, she did not care about her royal image. She rested her head gently against his shoulder. "You saw me as more than a crown," she whispered, "and now I see you as more than a man. You are courage itself."